But today we are just really, really excited that we have Dr. Shannon Greenfield with us. And he has graciously agreed to share some of his insights with us, and we're so thankful. Thank you so much for doing that. Just a few things about Dr. Greenfield. I think probably everyone is aware, and if you weren't, then Leah let the cat out of the bag a while ago when she said that she is his wife, and so Dr. Greenfield is married to Leah, our executive director for LifeQuest. Dr. Greenfield is a licensed clinical psychologist, and he has spoken, as Anita said, and Betty has mentioned that he has spoken with LifeQuest groups in the past. He's been a psychologist for over 22 years and brings to us today a wealth of experience, including he was the clinical director of outpatient behavioral health services for 11 years for St. Vincent, both in Little Rock and in Hot Springs, until the pandemic resulted in the closure of that department in 2021. And so now he's devoting his efforts and his professional energies towards private practice, where he loves doing psychotherapy and in private practice, and doing these wonderful speaking engagements for which we are so grateful. He speaks on topics of personal interest. As we said, he's married and he has two children. He has a son and a daughter, and their ages are 23 and 21. And he told me that even though he's not a grandparent yet himself, that he was blessed to enjoy rich relationships with his grandparents, and that they modeled for him many qualities that he is still trying in his life to emulate, which is a lovely thing that we would all hope that our grandchildren might one day say about us. He has a particular interest in the interpersonal relationship between spirituality and psychotherapy, and you might have gathered that from some of the readings that you did in preparation for today. And he enjoys dialogue with people of all faiths.
Amber alert on everyone's phone.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I was like, oh my goodness. Excuse me. And he enjoys dialogue with people of all faiths about the journey and the human experience. And so we want to say thank you so very, very much for taking time from your professional career to talk with us today. And we look forward to hearing what you're going to say and dialoguing with you, Dr. Greenfield.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm not sure when I share my screen what I will be able to see. I want y'all to know that to be able to speak up, ask questions, interrupt at any time. I understand that y'all are a close group, and there's a lot of interaction, and I love that. Some of the I will be operating off of a slideshow, and so I'm going to share my screen now and see what we can see. Okay. I can still see some people over there to the right, but not everybody. So if there we go, we start. Those are all the little hands of people who want to know what you know. All right, they're raising their hand, wanting knowledge and wisdom. There they go again, more questions. So I can only see, let's see, I can see Elizabeth and Anita and iPhone and Joe and Lynn and Betty. Is there anyone else? I'm afraid if people raise their hand, those are the only people that I can see. So,
okay,
yeah.
well, maybe they can just speak up, because I can only see part of them too. I see some of the same ones that you do and some different ones. So
okay. Well, if you see somebody's hand show up, interrupt me.
Okay.
And we'll be able to hear them anyway. So I obviously, I am not qualified to comment on something that I have not experienced. Y'all have experienced being grandparents. I have not. I'm okay with waiting a little while longer for that to happen, although I recognize that I'm not in control of when that does happen. So when it does happen, I'll try to suit up and show up. But until then, I can wait. I wanted to talk a little bit about elders, and it's something that's come up in my personal reading, and you can't read spirituality texts from any genre, any tradition, any wisdom tradition, that wisdom is not emphasized. And wisdom is correlated, although not perfectly, but it is correlated with age. And what we hope happens in the next hour or so, and I understand that some of you are going to have to hop off at 11, so I'm going to pick up the pace toward in the first half of the deck, so that we make sure that we get to the second half of the deck as quickly as we can. We're going to talk about the current situation briefly. We're not going to dwell in it, because goodness knows we get enough talking about all of the problems of the world, but we do need to appreciate and acknowledge the challenges that we're up against. We're going to talk about the difference between the power of the elderly and the power of the elder, two different things. I'm going to talk about a resource on a book that you may have read or may want to read, called The Heart of Grandparenting. And I'll present it sort of in terms of from the perspective of an elder. I'll give you an example of an obituary written by someone who we can talk about what the H, the E, the A, the R, and the T, what we saw in that example obituary of the memories. I'm going to present then my unified theory of life, right? Which is just over time, what makes sense to me about, it's a drawing about what makes sense to me of how to live a balanced life as a human being. I'm going to attempt to tie that into a second book, which was actually the one that Miss Vines passed along, called Falling Upwards. Oh, here's a picture of the first book, The Heart of Grandparenting by Ken Canfield. I would call this a glossy book, whereas this one is a matte finish. This one has more meat to it. This is Falling Upwards by Father Richard Rohr. I read it within the past month, and it has been one of those books that I think is going to have a significant change on my view of life. That there are different goals in the first half of life than the second half of life. And then finally finish with a call to eldership as a role. Okay. So let's take a look at the world today and the world tomorrow, and just brainstorming and offering out loud, what are we all dealing with right now? Let's just list them out. Pandemic. War. This is the audience participation part.
Political divisiveness.
Yes.
Well, social media it's a huge tool for good or ill, and I think children are very, very, very vulnerable. There's a lot of bullying going on through it. That's another worry.
Right, your audio kind of faded out there, but I heard mention of social media, and we're just inundated with information compared to where we were 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. Way too much stimulation. Our climate, our economy. I don't know that there's ever been a time, they say that each generation says, oh gosh, things are so horrible. I don't know, time will tell. This feels like to me a qualitatively different thing that we're dealing with, that these are some issues that, like the climate global crisis, for example, that overpopulation, limited resources, addiction. I mean, the list goes on and on of what we're dealing with. What about our grandchildren? Are there things that we see them dealing with that are unique to the times of today? Social media.
Isolation.
Isn't that
Isolation
ironic?
comes with social media.
Isn't that ironic? The more connected you are, the less quality of the connection. Mhm. Addiction, especially in urban environments, broken homes. What will our grandchildren have to deal with moving forward? There's no telling. They'll have to deal with the aftermath of what's going on now, plus new stuff that we can't even imagine. And so what help, if we can't imagine what they will have to face, what help do we have to offer? We have power and I'm gonna say we because I'm over 50. And so I'm eligible for AARP, even though I don't have grandkids. I'm going to say we and include myself because I love my kids, and I can only have beliefs about what it's like to be a grandfather. But from what I've observed, it's mostly wonderful, but a mixed bag, depending upon your situation. But there is quite a bit of power that comes. In fact, it can be intoxicating if you feel intoxicated with power today. The power of the elderly is the fastest growing demographic group in North America and the largest voting bloc, older people. Grandparents participating in parenting their grands is the fastest growing family dynamic in North America. And persons who are over the age of 65 possess 68% of the wealth in our country and account for nearly half of charitable giving. So there's a great deal of power that comes with the second half of life. Certainly not for every individual or for every group of people, but for North Americans, anyway, they're just being advanced in your career and having lived through what you've lived through, you have gathered resources, and you can help by sharing those resources. Powers of an elder are a little deeper than economic and financial and political. If you're an elder, you don't believe you know. I will never know what it is like to have a baby, to give birth to a child. I will never know that. I have lots of observations. I have some observations, not lots of observations. That would be weird. I have some observations, and I have been told and I have read, but even a first-time mother who reads and consults with experts and talks to friends only has beliefs about what having a baby is like. Once she has the baby, she knows what it's like to have a baby, and it's at a level of conviction far beyond any of the beliefs. In fact, some of those beliefs will be labeled as baloney. You know, they said this or I read that, and that was not the case. Now I know what it's like. And so mothers who have that shared experience know, the rest of us only believe. And so elders have lived through experiences. They don't have to believe, they can know firsthand. They can use that knowledge to guide others on the paths they have traveled, because it's only when we know something that we can be helpful to people who are going through the same thing. We can be guides for what we have experienced. Many of us try to be guides in things we haven't, kind of like I'm doing today, grandsplaining, a little bit. By living well, elders make a choice to live well, and therefore they shape generations to come through the power of modeling. And elders seek to know more. There's the saying of the more I know, the less I'm sure of. I've sensed a little bit of that, and it's true. There's a trend towards simplicity. The power of an elder in our society, we need elders right now. We need the wealth of experience to counter some of these difficult things that we're facing. This book, The Heart of Grandparenting, both of these books are Christian in orientation, although neither are particularly strong with it. Father Rohr's is a little bit more strong. He is a Franciscan monk after all, but he's a very inclusive and very gentle presentation of Christianity. So what does HEART stand for according to Canfield? First of all, heritage, just leaving a legacy, mindful and purposeful sharing of your story with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, not assuming that they know, not assuming that they understand. And you will have access to these materials, but part of leaving a legacy is knowing for yourself what is important about your life. And he has these 25 questions that you can ask yourself as you contemplate what you want to share with your heirs. These are adapted from Marshall Duke, Do You Know questions. Again, these will be available in the resource section, but some of these, where did your spouse grow up? The third one down. Where did your parents and grands and great-grands grow up? Some of them are tough. When you, first row, when you think of your nuclear family, what 5 adjectives come to mind? What about your extended family? What family member do you most look like, act like? What illnesses did you have? What schools did you go to? What jobs did you have? What's your family's faith tradition? What is your faith today? Ooh, that's a tough one. When you think of life's embarrassing moments, what 2 or 3 come to mind? I don't, be specific almost sounds a little cruel to throw in there, but his words, not mine. What was going on in the world around the time that you were born? What was going on in your family around the time you were born? So this book has some, and there are many books that help guide you in the process of gathering your personal history so that you can share. And there are personal historians actually who will help interview you. I did one of those in my life. It took 9 years, it was 300 pages, and I'm not going to touch that stove again. It was powerfully rewarding, but I underestimated how long it takes. Any questions at this juncture? Comments? Okay. The E in HEART is example. What are our grands and great-grands seeing? What are we hiding? What are we modeling? Are we modeling our values? Are we modeling devotion, strength, resilience, dignity through difficulties? That's his E. I love his A, angelic influence. A caring presence. We think about what an angel does, it's care and protect, even if it's invisible care and invisible protection. Communicating faith. We can have an angelic influence on our grands' lives just by being there. R for reconciliation, which means as an elder and as a grandparent elder, you can help keep the peace. You can help sort out what is true. You can help identify gratitudes. You can identify blessings, because blessings don't occur to teenagers by default, right? Gratitudes still come difficult to me sometimes. But with the wealth of experience that we have in the second half of life, we can offer guidelines. We can be the rumble strip on the interstate sometimes to let our grands and our heirs know where the lines are. We can show them how to apologize, and we can acknowledge when we are wrong. And very importantly, he emphasizes in the book, supporting the parents of our grands, if at all possible. You know, grands being directly involved in the raising of grandchildren is the largest growing family dynamic in North America. And many of you, is anyone in that position where they are have custodial care over a grandparent? I'm sorry, a grandchild at this time? Okay. It's a drastically growing group. And finally, teaching. And we have to be careful with this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but, and I'm aware that one of the things that I can't see when I'm looking at this is a watch. So I will look at my phone and say a prayer for the Amber Alert. It's always disturbing. Share what you learned, but often waiting till asked is good. It's one thing to share your opinions. It's another thing to share what you've learned. And have your own stories, parables, and one-liners. You know, Grandma always used to say, I remember Grandpa saying, old saws, old adages that will stick. Sharing your life with them, your hobbies, your activities, whether it's fishing or crafts or church, include them in your life so that they can see you. And wait and watch for those teachable moments when their guard is down, when their pride is hurt, when they have a skinned knee. Be ready to step in. So it's be patient and then jump in when needed. Any questions about his acronym of HEART?
I think that's very powerful. I love that. It's some of the topics that were represented there. We have discussed some of them in great length, some of them, but I've not seen it presented exactly like that. And I think that's pretty powerful.
And if you like his book, if you like vignettes, stories, and examples, he writes very much in that style, unlike the other book by Father Rohr, which is more of a theological work and explanatory work. There are a lot of vignettes. I know some people really, really like that. I tend to speed through vignettes because with what I do for a living, I hear the personal stories a lot. I want to get to the theory. But some people really like to resonate with the vignettes, and there's no right or wrong style there. I want to discuss an example. Someone I'm beginning to know better all of the time is an aspiring writer, and he shared with me the obituary he wrote for his grandmother. And I would like to read it, and as I read it, be thinking about where you hear heritage, where you hear example, basically the heart, the angelic influence, the reconciliation and teaching. Do you hear those in what he has to say in excerpts? I won't read the whole thing, excerpts. I have many memories of Nanny. She was a major influence in my life in many different ways. I remember Nanny as a queen, a Southern queen with Southern grace and Southern charm. As most of you probably know, Southern grace and charm is a little different than grace and charm in other parts of the world. Nanny had Southern grace and charm. For example, when Nanny poured you a Coke, the process would take at least 5 minutes. The reason is because pouring a Coke for Nanny involved at least a dozen separate smaller pours until the fizz completely stopped. The ultimate goal, of course, was to end up with the level of Coke actually being somewhat higher than the rim of the glass, held only by what physicists call surface tension. With Nanny, your glass had to be completely full. That is Southern grace and charm, even if your first sip had to be taken bending over the counter and slurping. In other parts of the world, grace would be discreetly paying the check when taking the family out to eat. Nanny, however, had Southern grace and charm. When we would go out to eat, Nanny would slip me the money beforehand, sometimes even in the parking lot, so that I could act like I paid for it myself. Southern grace and charm. Nanny also showed grace and charm when it came to seating arrangements. She's one of the few people I've ever known who would probably give up her seat in a game of musical chairs. She seemed only comfortable when she was sitting in the least comfortable chair of anyone else in the room. And if all the chairs were filled, she was the first to sit on the hearth. Or more likely, she would slip off to wash the dishes. That before anyone could notice, she would be nearly done and wiping off the counter. I remember Nanny as educated, the first person in her family to ever graduate from college. She went to college on a dare from a neighbor, made all A's the first semester, and graduated from Arkansas College in 1955 with a BS in education. I think of Nanny as a loving and supportive audience. By that, I mean she would give me all the attention I wanted, whenever I wanted it. She was the biggest fan I had. She and Paul would sit and listen to me ask them questions out of a book, a trivia book, like which fruit has the most sugar, peaches, lemons, or watermelons? Did anyone want to try the answer to that? Which one has more sugar, peaches, lemons, or watermelons?
Watermelon.
Lemons.
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 Wow.
Who knew? Because she loved learning, she loved to help me learn. She would listen to me read my American history textbook in the 7th grade. I'll stop there. Where did you hear heritage?
Well, she was Southern. You heard the Southern grace and
He knew her education. He knew why she went to school on a dare. That ties in with some of those questions. Why? Where do you hear example? Or where did you hear example?
She put others first by simply just always making sure that everyone else was comfortable, and she would take, even sitting on the hearth if necessary, because she put her family and friends first.
Angelic influence? She was his biggest fan. She is one of the things that I heard, give as much attention as he wanted. That care, protection, and attention. Where did you hear reconciliation? To be honest with you, that's the hardest concept of his that I can get my mind around, is exactly what he means by reconciliation. But she was presented as a strong character with strong values, who cared about the direction that her family took. And where do you hear teaching? Well, she was a teacher.
Listen to him read.
And even though it's kind of comical, the way she poured a Coke, I mean, he remembers that. Whether he models that in his life now or not, he was taught how to do it, by her method. And so, I mean, it made an impression on him.
Right. I wonder if she knew she was making an impression. Was she setting out to make an impression?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. Probably not.
her discreetly giving him money to pay for the meal was moving to me.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was a beautiful model. Yeah. That was angelic influence, maybe.
Yes, yeah, an example, all of the above, and they swirl together.
Yes.
The friend who I'm just beginning to learn about is me, and this was my mother's mother, and this was a portion of the obituary that I wrote for her when she died on April 1st, 1999, a few days later, and that's my nanny. And I could write similar homilies to my 3 other grandparents as well.
That was a lovely, lovely, it was very well written, and it was, you know, to have a grandson come away with those feelings as an adult man, I think would be something that I could speak for our group and say we would all hope to be able to leave those kind of impacts on the heart and minds of our grandchildren.
I hope so too, and I hope that your grandchildren tell you those perceptions before you pass. I did not write that until after she was gone. I would prefer now, in retrospect, to have written it before she left.
May
But,
I,
yes,
Shannon, may I interject something here?
please.
When my husband's mother died, so I'm going to tell you about what my son did. Became very involved. And he is one of 5 grandsons. And when my husband's brother was arranging for who would speak at the funeral, my husband's brother wanted to speak. He wanted a friend of my mother's to speak. We had a video of her that my brother-in-law had done. So she spoke at her own funeral, in effect, about her childhood. And then one of her daughters spoke. And my son just said, unbeknownst to me, he said, I want to speak as a grandson. And he talked about going over in the party mix, and you better, you as a grandson, you get hungry about 9 at night if you spent the night, but because they went to bed at 8:30, the grandparents, and you'd better be there at 5:30 to eat or you'd miss dinner. And then you'd get hungry, and fortunately there was that party mix always in there. And then he really spoke, though, when he got up. He said, I want to speak to Grandpa. So he talked more directly toward her husband, who was still alive. And there were a lot of people who came later and said, well, we haven't seen that before. One, we haven't seen a person on a video at their own funeral. And then for the grandson to talk about the sweet things he remembered as a kid. So what you're saying is moving. Do it before they pass away.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I've never heard that done either, speaking to the grandfather. I bet that was very healing for him in his grief process. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have to return to the Stone Age, aka my technological frontier here. I would like very much for this picture, which I drew with a Sharpie, and we're going to talk about. I wish it was all electronic and I could do reveals, and someday, you know, I'll get around to that. But let's return to the Stone Age, and I want to present. This is something that I present to people in my line of work to help sort of explain, I think, a 30,000-foot view of what balance is. And then I'm going to attempt to apply that to Father Rohr's book about the notion of 2 halves of life and the different spiritualities, the different goals of spirituality in the first half versus the second half of life. So let me see if I can remember how I did this in our training. There we go. So I have a little pointer, right? So pretend that I'm just starting, and we'll start with this line right here, right? This line right here, let's let that line represent reality. Reality is just what's happening. It's how it is. Everybody's in it. Even the animals, even cute little baby bunny rabbits are living in reality. Pain and joy are guaranteed, right? It's just part of reality. Even baby bunny rabbits get run over by cars. Horrible to think about, right? But in reality, all things can happen. And that's just how it is, okay? We have this other world up here represented by the dotted lines. And that world is the world that we can imagine. And we call that lots of different things: how it ought to be, how things should be, how things could be, the ideal, the happy line, like I will be happy if, I'll be happy when I make a certain amount of money. I'll be happy when I finish my degree. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when I have a child. I'll be happy when I retire, right? And that creates this gap right here. And I call that the gap of human suffering. See, little baby bunny rabbits, while they have a life that has pain in it, they don't worry about how it ought to be different, right? So humans have this idea of how life could be. And we all walk around with this gap that causes our human suffering. From early on, we are taught, if you don't like how it is, you need to get up off your hind end and strive and work and turn how things are into how they ought to be, right? And sometimes, did somebody have a comment? Sometimes we do better, and sometimes we fall short, and sometimes we even reach. We finish that degree. We get there. And what happens when we get there is that gap of suffering goes up as the arrow goes up. When we get there, it's now, right? So when I defended my dissertation in October of '98, the fulmination of 7 years after college, congratulations, Dr. Greenfield, walked out into the cool Missouri air. I mean, I'd reached it. What, for 7 years I had been striving for, I will be happy when. And I was very happy. It was about 4 or 5 blocks to my car. And that was the happiest 4 or 5 blocks. And by the time I got in my car, I was already starting to think, because that line had moved up, well, having a degree, I can't make any money with that until I get my license, and that's 2,000 supervised hours. So now I've got my degree, and now the new happy line is when I get my license, right? So if all we do is strive, that dotted line just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. But fortunately, there's another set of strategies. And those strategies are ones where we recognize, you know what? I would like to have a bigger TV because other people have a bigger TV. But my TV that I have is fine the way it is. I'm going to accept my TV and not just chase. I don't need a 65-inch curved screen TV that I can't afford. Mine is perfectly fine. Or now is what it is, and these ideas of how things should be are just in my head. Of where I have to live is right now. And so these strategies are things like meditation, prayer, hobbies that bring you back to the now. It's the striving and setting goals. We should do that. That's not a bad thing. We can and should strive to make things different. At the same time, we can and should recognize that how things are right now are sufficient. And so the idea is not to achieve the finish line, but to shrink the gap, to work on letting go of some of these illusions of like, well, I've got to make this much money and I've got to have this job. And maybe not. Maybe I could be flexible with that. Maybe if we had a small gap here between how things could be and how things are, we'd be more content. And I drew a little Tao symbol down here because to me, this is like breathing in and breathing out. Too much striving and not enough accepting. It's like breathing in too much and not breathing out enough. We hyperventilate, chasing things. Too much breathing out without enough striving, that leads to smoking marijuana and eating Cheetos and watching Days of Our Lives, right? I'm just going to accept right now, no need to strive. So the correct number of in breaths equals the correct number of out breaths. And this to me is balance. And this is also, can be symbolized by a cross or crucifix as being the phrase in the world, but not of the world, right? It's like I'm participating in the striving, I'm doing my civil duty, but at the same time, I'm not getting caught in the trap that this is more real than this. I'm allowing myself to be in the world, but not necessarily of the world, and being hung there in that state of tension between the horizontal dimension of our life, birth to death, the events in between, and the vertical nature of our human life, which is how can we accept reality more easily? Let me pause there for questions. How can I make this picture better? What's not in there? What do you disagree with? I'll settle for a knock-knock joke at this point.
Taking it all
I
in.
think it's profound. I really do. And I think sometimes as grandparents, we need to lower our expectations, knowing that our children are working hard and raising kids. And sometimes we have a lot more time than they do. And we get unrealistic expectations. I think that's just a wonderful diagram.
Betty,
Thank you.
I agree. I realized that you do have dreams for your kids. You do have dreams for your grandkids. And so before I leave this world, I guess I thought I had expectations they were all going to be at this point, and then I could leave peacefully. And when you come to the realization, the reality is they may not be at that point. They still may be very messy, their lives. And I can't fix all that. And so I think I love this theory you have of life, that if we can just accept the here and now, and we're a lot better off.
Right. Thank you.
It-
Yes,
it
you're right.
seems-
We have expectations for others as well as for ourselves.
Uh-huh.
I
It
interrupted
seems-
someone. Go ahead.
It's me. It seems somewhat analogous to what Father Rohr was saying about the first half of life and the second half of life. And of course, he has the pivotal point there that he talks a lot about. But, I think we spend the first half of our life in our career and our parenting and getting established and in the striving. And some people eventually reach a maturity level or whatever a transition point is, and they move to the accepting stage. Some people don't. Some people move there with grace and maturity and achieve a great deal in the second stage of accepting. Some people don't. Sometimes people are able to mix the striving and the accepting gradually along the way. It seems a lot of times they don't, to me. I mean, in my own life, I can see this in my own life very clearly.
And it is sad but true that some people live into their older years and do not reach this point of acceptance or reversal. It's also true too that someone who is 30, who has suffered a lot and been through a lot, may wisdom is a function of suffering more than it is a function of age. The connection is that the longer you've been around, the more times you've fallen, right? And so suffering, somebody can be 85, but if they've never suffered, they're very naive. Somebody can be 30 and have had a hard life, and they're very wise indeed. So yeah, and your comment leads right into the point after the theory of life about how to tie it into Father Rohr's. So the first half of life is building the container that you're going to live in, whereas second half spirituality is filling the container with content. Who am I going to be? Who am I? What is my relationship to the mystery, the unknown? We have to have a secure base before we can allow ourselves to consider the higher questions, just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've got to have security and shelter before we can work on self-actualization. The first half of life is about learning what are the limits of our control, exerting control over the environment, to bend the environment to our will, to test our mettle, so to speak. Where in the second half of life, we learn how to relinquish control, to stop trying so hard to control. It's very difficult. And the recognition that we're not in control, that we never were in control. We may have thought we were, but we weren't. And that's one of those downward strategies where we thought we were making this happen, but then it went away and we realized that, well, it is what it is. In the first half of life, Father Rohr talks about the loyal soldier, that following the rules, and you've got to do it this way, do things right, do things well, do things hard, striving. In the second half, spirituality is more like doing the right thing instead of doing things right. Establishing a secure identity is crucial in the first half of spirituality. It's one of the ways that elders can assist. We can say yes more than we say no, if we have that luxury. If we're a custodial parent, sometimes we still have to play the parenting role of saying no. But what we can do is we can live and share a sufficient identity. We can't model perfection, but we can model sufficiency. First half spirituality is trying desperately to understand. Second half spirituality is realizing you don't know and you're open to learning. Quantity, quality. More is better, less is more. And so Father Rohr talks about each of these as being crucial, and one has to occur before the other. We have to develop a self-esteem before we can begin to shed self-esteem and shed ego and layers of ego. We have to know who we are and what our limits are before we can begin to be of service. And it was just a very powerful book for me. I'm teetering, I think, right at the crossover point. And I think it's crucial to recognize, and you made this point, Elizabeth, that diagram, the drawing of striving and accepting, the diagram, I've always been using it as it pertains to this present moment and how to live a balanced life. But I think it also captures the spirit of what Richard Rohr is talking about, is the striving part and then the disappointment and the falling to earth and the getting up. The best church sign that I ever saw in my drives back and forth to Harrison when I worked at the Community Mental Health Center was fall down 7 times, get up 8. If we get up one more time than we fall down, we win. That appeals to me. Any questions about Richard Rohr's book, about the first half, second half spirituality, how it relates to being an elder? Okay. Trying to advance the slide, not succeeding. There we go. And finally, a call to eldership. Will you answer? Yeah, sorry. I just saw it and had to have it. Eldership is a calling. You know, growing older is a biological function. Becoming elderly is something that we're fortunate if we do become elderly, but we have to choose eldership. And Anonymous, this is long, but I thought this was really pretty. The societal and emotional problems that we, our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren face are many. Some are due to a loss of moral compass, some to overpopulation. I can't read all the way over, let me minimize. Some to overpopulation, some to natural disasters beyond our control. Just as we could not have imagined as a child what the world would be like today, so is the future unimaginable to our heirs. Yet they will face those circumstances directly while raising children of their own. They will need guidance as we do still. We cannot know what circumstances they will face, but we have direct knowledge, born of authentic experience of facing our own dire circumstances, of getting up after falling. And there were falls. We have survived every circumstance thus far and have no empirical evidence of an intolerable moment. Elders have suffered, persevered, and are invested in sharing their knowledge with those who are to follow. Because our heirs do not yet know what we know, they cannot understand what we tell them. But they can see with their own eyes what we show them, that discomfort and uncertainty will not kill us, that we can be comfortable in our own skins, that we can want the life we have instead of chasing the life we want, that love, grace, gratitude, and acceptance matter greatly, that integrity and perseverance lead to peace. They will see us and learn from us at times when we may not even know they are watching. We can show them, there's a typo, what it is like to live well, so they will know what it looks like when they arrive here. We may or may not have the opportunity to wait until they get here to show them. May you be an elder today and for the rest of your days and show the world how to be. And then the final, there we go. This was in for those adventurous souls, you don't have to, I have a reader called 365 Tao, which has a reading a day of kind of Eastern thought. And this was one from a couple of days ago. I went at dawn to a magnificent temple. Thousands had been blessed in life and in death in these venerable halls. Yet my most moving observation was an old woman silently sweeping the steps. Her concentration was perfect, her devotion was palpable, her thoroughness was complete, her uncelebrated act showed a truly Holy Spirit. Later in the day, wealthy people came to worship. Children with brightly colored toys ran over the gray stones. The abbot walked to his ceremonies. Monks passed in silent prayer. Of all who passed, how many were aware of the saintly service that had made their own devotion deeper? When the way is all we have to walk, those who prepare the way should be truly honored. I thought that was absolutely beautiful. That is my contact information. I guess it will be in the resource page.